r/ask Reddit. People who have survived school shootings. What was it like? Serious. I was in the room when one student shot another at our high school, then ran out of the building. This was the 80s, so there was no lockdown procedure. We all just left the building in various states of shock. I never felt threatened, so it really didn't affect me too badly. The victim lived in the shooter spent several years in the Indiana Youth Center with Mike Tyson and one of my best friends from high school. That's a bizarre sentence for you. Coming up on the 9th anniversary of a shooting that took place at my high school when I was a senior, a student that had been suspended earlier in the day returned to the school with his dad's handgun, went into the office of the vice principal that had suspended him and opened fire. He struck and killed the vice principal and critically injured the head principal, who was responding to the sound of gunfire. The student fled the school and took his own life in a parking lot not far from the campus. I was in class at the time and an announcement came over the intercom that we were in a code red lockdown. Some students' teachers say they remember the announcement saying that it was not a drill, but I'm not really certain if that was included or not. My class locked the door, turned off the lights, and huddled in a corner, but I don't remember a feeling of fear or that the room was tense. We had had a couple of code yellows earlier in the year for small fights in the hallways, and code yellow red drills weren't uncommon, so the class felt more inconvenienced by the fact that we were just about to break for our lunch when the announcement was made than anything else. As we sat for longer without any update, a realization definitely began to come over the class that something more serious had happened, and we were all on our phones looking to get some idea of what was going on. This was before Twitter was super popular, and there was a ton of confusion and misinformation going around from texts that people were getting from other students in the building and from family friends who were now watching the story develop on the news. We eventually received word that the school was going to be taken out of the code red and students' faculty would be released room by room and escorted out of the building by an armed police officer. We waited what felt like hours. We'd missed lunch and the room was restless, and finally received the knock on our door to indicate we were leaving. The officer walked us out the back of the school and through a parking lot that led to a church that neighbored the school. I met up with my parents and went home to watch my school on the news. Later that evening I went to dinner with some friends to just spend time with one another, and we got word while we were there that our vice principal had passed from her injuries. We finished our meal in silence, paid our check, and went to the school for a candlelight vigil. There had to have been 400 plus people with candles and homemade signs, and people just took turns praying and speaking to the crowd. Nothing planned or officially organized, just an opportunity for people to hurt together. It sounds cliche when people say I never thought it would happen here, but that really is the only response that makes sense after something like that happens. I remember an intense sadness in the days that followed and cried more than I ever had before or since. When I think back about that day, I like to remember the kindness of the community at the candlelight vigil and the posters of support from neighboring schools that lined the main hallway of the building for the next month. I was around for Elliot Rodger shooting at UCSB. There are a few things that I remember being surprising. The sense of humor. This was not everyone, but I remember a couple people making finger gun gestures at each other. I think this is because the event lasted a while and spread over the Isla Vista area, so there was a general discomfort wherever you were. I think people were coping with the stress however you could. Gallows humor. Basically, the awkwardness of trying to console someone who just saw their friends shot or were shot at themselves. If you have ever been in a social situation where you didn't know what to say, add in the fact that whatever you say might permanently affect the life of the person you are talking to. Your school is now famous for this, although this was during a time that school shootings weren't super common, so that might be changing. I was at UCLA during the shooting in 2016. It was only a disgruntled grad student shooting his advisor and then himself, but we didn't know that at the time. Everyone was assuming it was a mass. I was walking back to my apartment just off campus when the notification went out that there were reports of gunshots and to get inside because campus was locking down. I finished walking home and turned on the news with some friends. I had other friends who were hiding in classrooms. The craziest part was the amount of misinformation going around on social media and in various group messages I was a part of. There were reports of more people shot and multiple shooters in a coordinated attack around various parts of campus and such. I'm not sure how much of that was fabricated maliciously and how much started with someone seeing a plainclothes officer with a gun or something and the story snowballing from there. I called my mom afterward and she started crying. She said she hadn't called me sooner because she didn't want my phone to ring in case I was in hiding. I was a student at Virginia Tech during the 2007 massacre. I wasn't directly in the fire or anything, just a student in the dorms. It was very surreal. That morning my friends and I sat in the dorms watching the news evolve on campus. It started off saying 1 or 2 injured. At that point we didn't make too much of the situation. I remember the newscaster saying at one point that the new updates was over 20 fatalities. The final count was 32, and we all just froze. We assumed it was an error. It was not. As the day evolved we reached out to our friends to make sure they were okay. But cell service was very spotty. I had a very uneasy feeling that a somewhat peripheral friend of mine was in danger and tried to text her. It turns out she was shot, but survived. Another of our friends was shot and killed. The next few days were strange. Classes were cancelled and many left the campus. President Bush came to speak to us, but I'm sure even he felt helpless with not much to contribute. Eventually, they cancelled the remainder of classes and exams for the semester and we left for the year. The summer was difficult. At my summer job people kept trying to talk to me about the shooting, both co-workers and customers. I don't know why, but I felt okay discussing it with fellow VT students but nobody else, including my other friends and family. I eventually quit that job and got a new one. Not telling anyone I was a VT student. Returning to school felt surreal. We did a lot of school spirit activities at football games. We are Virginia Tech, etc. But it was definitely a different atmosphere. I felt very uncomfortable in lecture halls and whenever my mind went blank I imagined a shooter coming in and killing us. That feeling still persists sometimes. In large groups I'll start thinking about a mass murder occurring. That day, I'll always say, is the day I grew from a child to adult. I changed in ways both positive and negative. I made new bonds with my fellow classmates but felt isolated from some other people. It was definitely the defining experience of my young adulthood. For a long time, I didn't want to talk about these experiences with anyone. Now, I try and speak more openly about it because I am trying to advocate for a better future. I was in the Arapahoe High School shooting in 2013. The kid got kicked off the speech and debate team and decided to get revenge on the teacher. He bought a shotgun and went into the school on Friday the 13th. He fired 2 shots right off my hallway and killed a girl, who died after being in a coma for a couple of weeks. Then he went to the library, started a fire, and killed himself. I was in my science class right off the hallway. We were in the middle of a test and I, being the shit student I was, just wanted out. I was about to ask to go to the bathroom when I decided "Uck it, I'll finish the test, then go home." 5 minutes later there was a gunshot. The first thing that crossed my mind was that a janitor was removing one of those giant ass wooden doors and accidentally dropped it, slapping it against the ground. Students looked back and forth nervously. Then a second shot went off. My teacher went out into the hallway, and a minute later returned to the room and told us to get into lockdown. I guess he saw the smoke in the stairwell and saw what happened in that hallway. Before long we were all crammed into the corners behind the big lab tables. I was sitting in the middle of the classroom so I was one of the last kids to get to a spot. So I was basically sitting out in the middle of the room hiding behind a trash can. The whole time my teacher, a massive slab of muscle, was upright right next to one of the 2 doors ready to duck up anyone that might walk in. We were in lockdown a good 3 minutes before the announcement even happened. We sat there for what felt like hours before the fire alarm went off. I'm assuming this was the fire started in the library. Then even longer and we began hearing voices down the hallway. My teacher looked right to me, in the middle of the room, with a nervous look in his eyes. Finally, cops SWAT showed up. They tried the door and my teacher jumped and looked at me again, who was giving a violent nod and a thumbs up. They cleared the hallway before asking us to open the door. We all got pat down upon exiting, and sat out in the cold on the track field for a couple of hours before being bussed off to a local church. I remember texting my parents and sister that I loved them, and funnily enough I remember making jokes to my mom, cause I bet she was more scared than I was, which was pretty ducking scared. For the rest of the month we had a long winter break. When we all got back things seemed really cool. Everyone was closer to each other and supportive. As the year went on things went back to normal. The usual bullying and other shit. So I went to online school. Ask any questions you have. Edit. Being in Colorado, where there was Columbine and Aurora, I now don't like going places with big crowds, especially protests or anything of the sort. Also, before you click this link, do me a favor and don't remember the shooter's name. Don't look at his picture. Don't give him that honor. He was troubled and I feel bad for him. denverpost.com link. Edit 2. I remember afterwards while we were waiting to be bussed off, everyone was speculating who it was. They were speculating this one kid I knew and got along with pretty well. He was a weird kid but lots of fun. I remember thinking it was shitty. All of a sudden everyone wasn't surprised it might be him because of the way he was treated. After school was back on, everyone was suddenly nice to this kid. They knew it was because they didn't want to be the next target. To the high school kids that might be reading this, you know that one quiet awkward kid that sits in your class? Don't be nice to him because you're afraid of what he'll do if he snaps. Be nice to him because we all need that in our life. After all, we're all stuck on this rock hurtling through space. So just be ducking pleasant to one another. Start a conversation. Ask about hobbies. Be a good person. Edit 3. Think of a person right now. Any person. Now send that person a text. How are you doing lately? Now listen to what they have to say and offer support. Be there for the people you know. Survivor of the SHS shooting here. I was 9 at the time and in 4th grade. I was in the gym, and we were just going through the normal routine. That is, the gym teacher explaining the activity and us participating. I remember it was rope climbing that day and I was so excited. All of a sudden we heard a loud bang noise, and everyone looked towards the door. At first we shrugged it off as the janitor dropping something in the hallway, but after the second and third bangs we were ushered into the corner and told to be very quiet while my teacher ran and locked the doors. We were confused but unbothered at first, but the longer it went on the more worried we became. The loudspeaker crackled on and we heard muffled voices and muffled bangs, then silence. Years later I was told it was our principal and the office staff trying to warn us, but were killed. By now we were all silently sobbing and holding hands. I remember being very scared but not entirely sure of what. Of course, a school shooting was not the first thing on our minds. Eventually my teacher told us to crawl across the floor and into a supply closet, where we sat terrified until SWAT and police officers opened the doors and helped us out. We went out one of the back doors and walked the drive to the firehouse, where our parents picked us up and took us home. That experience has changed me forever, and while the effects I had initially, nightmares, anxiety, etc., have lessened, I still feel them. I and many others suffer from PTSD and I don't think a day goes by where I don't think about it. While I did not know everyone who passed personally, I have seen the toll it took on my community and feel for their families and friends deeply. RIP angels. You are loved. I went to school next to a school shooting. It was our sister school, so everyone from school A kinda knew everyone from school B. The morning it happened, I remember watching all the teachers in our back hallway gather around and huddled together. I made eye contact with one of them, who was visibly very distressed. I turned to the kid next to me and said something serious is happening, and he laughed and said I was paranoid. Turns out I wasn't. They didn't tell us anything. They tried to hide the whole fact, but since so many people had connections to the other school, we all found out quickly. We went on loose lockdown, so no going outside, which I still find odd, but whatever. 4 kids died. Personally, I wasn't in the shooting, but I am still a little shaken. That previous weekend, I met a kid who was very cute and I was debating getting his number. I didn't because I was shy, but the morning it happened, I was thinking of him and what if we had been texting and blah blah because I'm 14 and had major crushes. I came to find out he was one of the kids who died. That still kinda haunts me. I go to Saugus High School and was at school during the most recent school shooting that happened 2 or 3 weeks ago. I'll start from the beginning. I got to school at probably around 7:10 because I am Mormon, so I had a class called seminary, basically Bible study, and so we ended and I walked to school. I walked in and went towards the back of campus-ish, but I could still see where it took place in the quad. I'm just chilling there with my friends when I look over and see some kid walking really quickly towards the middle of the quad, and it happened so quickly. He was crying, I think. He ripped his backpack around and I just knew there something was wrong. He reached in and shot the girl in front of him. I won't say her name, but I knew her quite well, and she was instantly dead, I'm pretty sure. At that point I don't remember much. I just ran. And I ran and I ran and I ran until I collapsed on the sidewalk outside of school, and some parent came and helped me up. Scariest moment of my life. I knew the kid that was the shooter. I knew the girl that died. I knew one of the injured. I'm still dealing with it today, and it has honestly made me so scared. A chair fell and I just sat in my room for a couple hours. I hope no one ever has to deal with anything like that ever. I was in the STEM shooting. We heard 5 shots and sat in a corner for a little while, then some yelling. I heard some guy moaning in pain outside, then a bullet came through the wall and scratched my friend. We left to another corner, then there were 2 more shots. I was texting friends and family, and my friend texted me, wanna play 8-ball pool. The cops removed us. There was blood in the halls. We stood around in the cold for a couple hours. A friend of mine got shot in the leg 3 times, though she's okay now, both of them are. I hid in a department closet for a few hours with some girls I barely knew because I met them by yelling, "There's a shooter on campus," at them. We sobbed and texted our loved ones until police escorted us out of the building after catching the guy. To this day I am a lot more anxious and depressed. I haven't been able to complete a college class since the event. I am scared to be on campus. I was at Columbine during the shooting. I was in the cafeteria when it started, just outside, and I thought it was a senior prank at first. After I realized it was not, I ran and hid. I was in there for a couple hours just kinda huddling in a corner with some students and teachers. I wasn't really scared. It was more an adrenaline rush that lasted for what seemed like days. Time seemed to go super slow and it was honestly boring. It is a weird feeling that I can't describe. I was more worried about my friends and GF than myself. I was close to a lot of pip-bombs and gunshots, but never really felt like I was going to get hit in any way. My parents took it harder than I did, especially my mom. She was in shock and crying uncontrollably when she picked me up. My brother was at the feeder middle school that got locked down. He didn't want to get stuck at school, so he walked home. When we got home, he was playing video games like nothing happened. Edit. Forgot to mention that all our stuff, including backpacks, wallets, was in my backpack, and cars were kept for months. Sounds kinda shitty compared to what some people went through, but it was a major inconvenience. What was crazy was the support and donations we received after. All sorts of companies donated new backpacks, school supplies, books, blankets, food, and more. I think I even got a new TI-82 Plus. A bunch of celebrities would visit as well. I'm an adjunct professor at UNC Charlotte, where a shooting happened last May. It was the last day of classes and I let my students out 30 minutes early. And I'm so glad I did, because the shooting occurred about 20 minutes later. I got one of those emergency alerts on my phone that only said active shooter in building, run, hide, fight. I remember thinking, what the hell does that mean? I realized that I was woefully unprepared or trained for this kind of situation. I was glued to the TV the rest of the night, just wondering what I would have done if I were on campus, or if, God forbid, the shooter was in my building. The campus is still recovering from that traumatic experience, and I have a totally new awareness of my surroundings. Checking doors for locks, closing the blinds on the windows, positioning myself near doors. It was weird because classes were over, so we all just left for the summer and exams were cancelled. This doesn't count as a school shooting, but there was a point in my middle school in 8th grade where someone brought containers of ethanol. There were rumors that he had guns in his locker, and he also had locks and chains, and he was planning on locking the school in and setting it on fire. My friend found out and told on him. He was arrested and we were evacuated. All the police released where the containers of ethanol were found, but they were keeping the chains and locks secret. This summer, the incident was last year. The person who was gonna burn the school down harassed and threatened my friend so much that he shot himself. I will never forget my friend's name, or the student's name. My friend was a good person and didn't tell anyone what was happening until his last few days. We had a memorial for him at the school, but it still isn't the same without him. Whoa, you made it to the end? You're a ducking beast. I'll cut you a deal. Smash like and subscribe for more curated content. It's free and that's a great price.